He faced the most powerful pharaoh in the world. He split the sea in half. He came down from a mountain in flames, carrying God's law in his hands. He fed millions in a desert where nothing grew. He survived rebellions, plagues, serpents, and 40 years of sand. And in the end, a single moment of anger cost him everything. Moses would die looking at the land he would never set foot on. To understand the weight of that sentence, you need to go back to the beginning. Not the beginning of the journey in the desert, the beginning of everything. The day when a Hebrew baby was placed in a papyrus basket and abandoned in the waters of the Nile because the alternative was certain death at the hands of Egyptian soldiers. The Egypt of that era was the absolute superpower of the ancient world. The pyramids were already over 1,000 years old. The empire controlled trade routes stretching from Nubia to the Mediterranean. Egyptian armies were feared across 3 continents, and at the heart of that empire, a population of Hebrew slaves was growing at an alarming rate. Pharaoh had ordered the extermination of all newborn Hebrew boys. It was population control disguised as national security policy. The Hebrews were multiplying too fast. They represented a demographic threat. The Egyptian solution was brutal and mathematically calculated. Kill the boys. Let the girls live to serve. In 1 generation, the problem solves itself. The ethnicity dilutes. The threat disappears. The Hebrew midwives receive direct orders. When you attend the birth of a Hebrew woman, check the sex. If it's a boy, kill him immediately. If it's a girl, let her live. But the midwives feared God more than they feared Pharaoh. They disobeyed. They invented excuses. They said the Hebrew women were too vigorous, that they gave birth before the midwives arrived. Pharaoh then escalated the operation. He no longer trusted the midwives. He ordered all the Egyptian people that any Hebrew boy found should be thrown into the Nile. Death by drowning, carried out by ordinary citizens, institutionalized terror. It was in this scenario that Moses was born. His mother Jochebed saw that the baby was special. Exodus chapter 2 uses an interesting expression. She saw that he was beautiful. It wasn't just physical beauty. There was something different about that child, something she couldn't explain but also couldn't ignore. Jochebed hid her son for 3 months, 90 days of constant tension. Every cry from the baby was a risk of death. Every visit from Egyptian neighbors was danger. Every patrol that passed by the street was a threat. But babies grow. They cry louder. They become harder to hide. 3 months was the limit. When she could no longer hide him, she did something that seems like madness, but was a calculated survival gamble. She took a basket of reeds. She waterproofed it with bitumen and pitch, the same substances used to caulk boats. She placed the baby inside, and she positioned the basket on the banks of the Nile, among the reeds, exactly where Pharaoh's daughter used to bathe. It wasn't random abandonment. It was a calculated bet. Miriam, Moses' older sister, stayed watching from a distance, waiting to see what would happen, and exactly what Jochebed expected happened. The Egyptian princess came down to the river to bathe. She saw the basket among the reeds. She sent a maid to fetch it. She opened it. She found the baby crying. The princess immediately recognized it was a Hebrew child. She knew about her father's order. She knew that baby should be dead. And yet she had compassion. She decided to keep him. She decided to raise him as her son. Miriam, still watching, saw the opportunity. She approached and asked if the princess wanted her to call a Hebrew nurse to care for the child. The princess agreed, and the nurse chosen was Jochebed herself. Moses' biological mother was hired to nurse and raise her own son. She received payment from the royal palace to do what she would have done for free. God had transformed the death sentence into a scholarship. Moses grew, up in Pharaoh's palace. He had access to the best education available in the ancient world. He learned to read and write in hieroglyphics, a system of more than 700 symbols that very few people mastered. He studied Egyptian mathematics with its complex fraction system. He learned astronomy, the science that allowed predicting the Nile floods and calculating the seasons. He studied engineering, the same engineering that had built the pyramids. Acts chapter 7 verse 22 says that Moses was instructed in all the wisdom of the Egyptians and was mighty in words and deeds. He wasn't just a student. He was outstanding. He was a prince. He had authority. He had resources. He had a guaranteed future in the most powerful court on the planet. 40 years like this. 4 decades living as Pharaoh's grandson, eating the best food, wearing the finest clothes, sleeping in the best chambers, commanding servants, being revered. But he knew who he was. His biological mother had done her job. During the nursing years, Jochebed didn't just feed her son's body. She fed his soul. She told him about Abraham, about the promise, about the God who had made a covenant with his people, about the identity that no Egyptian palace could erase. Moses lived divided. On the outside, an Egyptian prince. On the inside, a Hebrew. And that division would eventually explode. At 40 years old, Moses left the palace to see how his blood brothers lived. What he found was brutality. Hebrew slaves working under scorching sun, making bricks of mud and straw, building storage cities for Pharaoh. Egyptian taskmasters with whips in their hands, punishing anyone who slowed down. And then Moses saw a specific scene. An Egyptian beating a Hebrew. It wasn't just supervision, it was gratuitous violence, systematic, a cruelty. Something broke inside Moses at that moment. 40 years of divided identity converged in an instant of fury. He looked around. He made sure no one was watching. And he killed the Egyptian. He buried the body in the sand. He thought the secret was safe. He thought he had done justice. The next day, he returned and saw 2 Hebrews fighting each other. He tried to intervene. He tried to make peace. But one of them responded with a question that changed everything. Who made you a ruler and judge over us? Do you want to kill me? Like you killed the Egyptian? The secret had leaked. In less than 24 hours, everyone knew. Pharaoh found out. He ordered Moses' execution. The prince became a fugitive. Palace life ended in a day. Moses fled to the desert of Midian, hostile territory far from Egyptian reach. He arrived exhausted, thirsty, with nothing but the clothes on his body. He sat down by a well, and there, in that moment of total defeat, he found his next chapter. 7 women came to draw water for their father's flocks. Local shepherds tried to drive them away. Moses intervened. He defended the women. He helped water the animals. Their father, a Midianite priest named Jethro, was impressed. He invited Moses to stay. He offered one of his daughters, Zipporah, in marriage. And so, the man who had been trained to command armies became a shepherd of sheep. 40 years as a prince, now 40 years as a shepherd. The same amount of time, symmetric phases of a life that seemed to have completely lost its direction. Moses probably thought his significant story had ended, that the episode with the Egyptian had destroyed any possibility of greater purpose, that he would die caring for sheep in the middle of nowhere, vaguely remembering the days when he had been someone important. 80 years of life, and apparently nothing to show for it except a flock that wasn't his, and a small family in a foreign land. And then, a bush began to burn without being consumed. Moses was shepherding Jethro's flock near Mount Horeb, also called Sinai. He saw a bush on fire. It wasn't unusual in the desert. Dry bushes catch fire easily. But this one wasn't being consumed. The flames weren't diminishing. The branches weren't turning to ash. The fire burned, but it didn't destroy. Moses approached to investigate, and a voice came from the midst of the flames. "Moses, Moses," he answered, "here I am." "Do not come near. Take your sandals off your feet, for the place where you are standing is holy ground." God identified himself as the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He said he had seen the affliction of his people in Egypt. He had heard their cry. He had come down to deliver them. And then came the mission that would change human history. "Come now, and I will send you to Pharaoh, that you may bring my people out of Egypt." Moses tried to refuse, not once, 5 times. He said he was nobody important. God responded that he would be with him. He said he didn't know God's name to present to the people. God revealed his name, "I am who I am." He said the people wouldn't believe him. God gave miraculous signs, a staff that becomes a serpent, a hand that becomes leprous and then heals, water that turns to blood. He said he didn't know how to speak well. God said he had made man's mouth and would teach him what to say. Finally, Moses simply asked God to send someone else. God became angry, but he didn't give up. He appointed Aaron, Moses' brother, as spokesman, and the mission was confirmed. Moses returned to Egypt at 80 years of age. The fugitive returning to the country where he had a death sentence. The shepherd of sheep confronting the most powerful man in the world. The foolishness of God against the wisdom of men. What happened next defies any natural narrative. Moses and Aaron went before Pharaoh and said, "Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, let my people and go." Pharaoh responded, "Who is the Lord, that I should obey his voice? I do not know the Lord, nor will I let Israel go." And thus began the confrontation that would devastate the most powerful nation in the world. 10 plagues, each more devastating than the last, each attacking a specific aspect of Egyptian life, each demonstrating power over the gods that Egypt worshipped. First plague, water into blood. The Nile, worshipped as a deity, source of all Egyptian life, became liquid death. Fish died. The smell of rot spread throughout the country. For 7 days, there was no drinkable water. Second plague, frogs. They came out of the Nile in impossible numbers. They invaded houses, beds, ovens, kneading bowls. The Egyptians worshipped Heket, the goddess with a frog's head, associated with fertility. Now the goddess was everywhere, causing disgust instead of reverence. Third plague, lice. The dust of the earth became parasites that infested people and animals. The Egyptian magicians who had managed to imitate the first 2 plagues failed. They told Pharaoh, "This is the finger of God." Fourth plague, flies. Dense swarms covered Egypt. But from this plague onward, God made a distinction. The land of Goshen, where the Hebrews lived, remained free. The separation was visible. The judgment had a specific address. Fifth plague, pestilence on the livestock, horses, donkeys, camels, oxen, sheep. The Egyptian livestock died. The Hebrew livestock remained untouched. Apis, the bull god of Egypt, couldn't even protect himself. Sixth plague, boils. Painful sores covered the skin of Egyptians and animals. The magicians themselves were afflicted. They couldn't even stand before Moses because of the wounds. Seventh plague, hail, rain of ice stones mixed with fire. It destroyed crops, killed animals that were in the field, wounded people. There had never been such a storm in the history of Egypt. Eighth plague, locusts. They came with the east wind. They covered the face of the whole land so that the land was darkened. They devoured all the vegetation, all the fruit of the trees, everything the hail had left. Nothing green remained. Ninth plague, darkness, thick darkness that could be felt. For 3 days, no one could see another. No one rose from his place, but the children of Israel had light in their dwellings. The sun god, Ra, supreme Egyptian deity, was humiliated. His people were blind while the slaves could see. 10th plague, death of the firstborn. On the same night at midnight, the angel of death passed through every Egyptian house. From Pharaoh's firstborn to the firstborn of the prisoner in the dungeon, all the firstborn died. There was no house without a dead. The weeping was deafening, but the houses that had lamb's blood on the doorposts were spared. The Hebrews killed lambs at twilight, painted the doorframes with blood, roasted the meat, and ate it with unleavened bread and bitter herbs. When the destroyer passed, he saw the blood and passed over. That night, Pharaoh summoned Moses and Aaron in haste, in the dark, with the body of his own firstborn son still warm. And he spoke the words that 430 years of slavery had been waiting to hear. "Rise up, go out from among my people, both you and the children of Israel, and go, serve the Lord as you have said." Freedom. The Egyptians pressured the Hebrews to leave quickly. They were afraid that everyone would die if they delayed longer. They gave gold, silver, clothing, everything the Hebrews asked for. It was the back payment for 400 years of slave labor. It was the plunder of Egypt. 600,000 men on foot, besides women and children, left that night. The total estimate exceeds 2 million people, an entire nation moving at once, with flocks, herds, carts, belongings, marching toward freedom. But freedom was short-lived. Pharaoh changed his mind. He regretted letting the slaves go. He gathered 600 chosen chariots, his elite cavalry, and pursued the Hebrews. He caught up with them, camped by the Red Sea. Ahead, water. Behind, the best-trained army in the ancient world. On the sides, mountains, no way out, no chance, no natural hope. The people panicked. They cried out against Moses. "Were there no graves in Egypt that you took us away to die in the wilderness? What is this you have done to us, bringing us out of Egypt? It would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness." Moses answered, "Do not be afraid. Stand firm and see the salvation of the Lord. The Lord will fight for you, and you shall hold your peace." God commanded Moses to stretch out his hand over the sea. An east wind blew all night. The waters divided, liquid walls on each side, held by invisible force. The bottom of the sea became dry. Millions of people crossed on foot between walls of water reaching dozens of meters high. When the Egyptian army tried to follow, the chariot wheels got stuck in the seabed. Confusion seized the troops, and then Moses stretched out his hand again. The waters returned. 600 chariots of war, all the cavalry, all the soldiers, covered by the sea. Not a single one survived. Israel saw the Egyptians dead on the shore, and that day they feared the Lord and believed in the Lord and in Moses, his servant. That was Moses, the man who faced the empire, the man who split oceans, the man chosen by God to perform the greatest miracles the world had ever seen up to that point. And it was only the beginning of a 40-year journey. After the sea came the desert, and the desert brought problems that no miracle solved permanently. Hunger, thirst, extreme heat during the day, intense cold during the night, snakes, scorpions, hostile terrain where nothing grew naturally, and the worst of all problems, people, try to grasp the logistical challenge. 600,000 adult men who left Egypt, not counting women, children, and elderly. The total number probably exceeded 2 million people, 2 million mouths to feed every day, 2 million bodies needing water, 2 million different personalities, different opinions, different expectations, different complaints. 3 days after crossing the Red Sea, they found water at Marah, but it was bitter, undrinkable. The people grumbled against Moses. First official complaint of the journey. Moses cried out to the Lord. God showed him a tree. Moses threw the tree into the waters. The waters became sweet. Problem solved. 45 days after leaving Egypt, the food ran out. The people grumbled again. They said it would have been better to die in Egypt, where at least they had pots of meat and bread in abundance. They accused Moses and Aaron of bringing the whole congregation into the desert to kill them with hunger. God responded with manna, bread from heaven. It appeared every morning like dew on the ground, white like coriander seed, tasting like honey cakes. The people gathered an omer per person, about 2 liters. If they kept it until the next day, it bred worms and smelled bad. Except on Friday, when they could gather double, because there would be no manna on the Sabbath, for 40 years without interruption, and in the evening, quail. Huge flocks of birds falling on the camp, fresh meat available for 2 million people in the middle of nowhere. They camped at Rephidim. There was no water. The people quarreled with Moses. This time it was worse. Exodus chapter 17 says they almost stoned him. The tension was explosive. Moses cried out to God, "What shall I do with this people? They are almost ready to stone me." God gave specific instructions. Go on, ahead of the people. Take with you some of the elders of Israel. Take in your hand your staff, the one with which you struck the Nile. Go, and I will stand before you there on the rock at Horeb. You shall strike the rock, and water will come out of it, and the people will drink. Moses obeyed. He struck the rock. Water gushed out in sufficient quantity for 2 million people and all the animals. Problem solved. Again. That's the pattern that would repeat for 40 years. The people complain. Moses intercedes. God resolves, repeated dozens of times. Hundreds of variations of the same cycle. But the wear and tear accumulates. Moses wasn't just a political leader. He was the supreme judge, mediator of all conflicts, official spokesman for God, permanent intercessor for the people. All disputes came to him. All religious questions, all personal complaints, all administrative problems. Exodus chapter 18 describes a typical day. Moses sat from morning until evening judging cases. Endless line of people with endless problems. The people stood from morning until evening, waiting for their turn. Jethro, his father-in-law, visited the camp and was horrified by what he saw. He asked Moses why he was doing this alone, why all the people stood before him from dawn to dusk. Moses explained that the people came to inquire of God, that when they had a matter they came to him, and he judged between one and another, and made known the statutes of God and his laws. Jethro responded with practical wisdom. What you are doing is not good. You will surely wear yourself out, both you and this people who are with you. For this thing is too heavy for you. You cannot do it alone. That's when they instituted the system of lesser judges, capable men, God-fearing men of truth who hated dishonest gain, were appointed over groups of thousands, of hundreds, of 50s, of 10s. Simple cases were resolved by them. Only the difficult cases went up to Moses. Even so, the weight remained crushing. Numbers chapter 11 records the moment when Moses completely broke down. The people were complaining again. They wanted meat. They were tired of manna. They wept at the doors of their tents, family by family. They remembered with nostalgia the fish they ate for free in Egypt, the cucumbers, melons, leeks, onions, and garlic. Now, our soul is dried away. There is nothing at all but this manna before our eyes. Moses heard the weeping, and something inside him simply collapsed. He went to God and poured out everything. Why have you dealt ill with your servant? And why have I not found favor in your sight, that you lay the burden of all this people on me? Did I conceive all this people? Did I give them birth, that you should say to me, carry them in your bosom as a nurse carries a nursing child, to the land that you swore to their fathers? Where am I to get meat to give to all this people? For they weep before me and say, give us meat that we may eat. I am not able to carry all this people alone. The burden is too heavy for me. If you will treat me like this, kill me at once. Kill me. The greatest leader of Israel, the supreme deliverer, the incomparable prophet, asked to die because he couldn't take it anymore. God didn't kill him. Instead, he ordered him to choose 70 elders of Israel, men known as elders and officers of the people. He brought them to the tent of meeting. and the Spirit that was on Moses was distributed among the 70. They prophesied, demonstrating that the authority had been transferred. The weight was distributed, but the accumulated damage remained. Exhaustion had settled into the bones, and the crises kept coming. Numbers chapter 12 records something particularly painful. Miriam and Aaron, Moses' own siblings, began to speak against him. The pretext was the Cushite woman Moses had married, but the real issue was power. They said, "Has the Lord indeed spoken only through Moses? Has he not spoken through us also?" The Lord heard, and he called the three to the tent of meeting. He came down in the pillar of cloud and spoke in defense of Moses that echoes through the centuries. "If there is a prophet among you, I, the Lord, make myself known to him in a vision. I speak with him in a dream. Not so with my servant Moses. He is faithful in all my house. With him I speak mouth to mouth, clearly, and not in riddles, and he beholds the form of the Lord." And then came the judgment. The anger of the Lord was kindled against Miriam and Aaron. When the cloud departed, Miriam was leprous, white as snow. Aaron pleaded with Moses, and Moses, the same Moses who had been criticized, interceded for the sister who had betrayed him. "Oh God, please heal her." God healed her after 7 days outside the camp. Numbers chapter 16 brings the rebellion of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram. 250 prominent leaders of Israel rose up against Moses and Aaron. The accusation was direct. "You have gone too far. For all in the congregation are holy, every one of them, and the Lord is among them. Why then do you exalt yourselves above the assembly of the Lord?" It was a coup, organized insurrection, open challenge to the authority established by God. Moses fell on his face. Then he proposed a public test. The next day, each one would take his censer, put fire and incense in it, and the Lord would show who was holy. The next morning, when the whole congregation had gathered to see the outcome, the ground opened its mouth. It swallowed Korah, Dathan, Abiram, their families, their tents, everything they owned. They went down alive into the pit, and the earth closed over them. And fire came out from the Lord and consumed the 250 men who were offering incense. You would think this would be the end of the rebellions. But the next day the whole congregation grumbled against Moses and Aaron, saying, "You have killed the people of the Lord." A plague began. Moses told Aaron to take the censer, run into the midst of the people, and make atonement. Aaron ran, stood between the dead and the living, and the plague stopped. But 14,700 people had already died. 40 years like this, 480 months, 14,600 days of leadership, every dawn bringing new problems, every dusk bringing new complaints. Moses carried all this on his back. He got up every day and led a people who didn't want to be led. And now, finally, you have enough context to understand what happened at Meribah. It's the 40th year. The pilgrimage is almost over. There's little time left before entering the Promised Land. The people are camped at Kadesh in the wilderness of Zin, and Miriam, Moses' older sister, has just died. The text of Numbers chapter 20 mentions Miriam's death almost casually. One verse, "And the people of Israel, the whole congregation, came into the wilderness of Zin in the first month, and the people stayed in Kadesh, and Miriam died there and was buried there." Moses barely had time to process the grief, because the next verse already brings the next crisis. Now there was no water for the congregation. Again, 40 years after Rephidim, the same situation, lack of water, thirsty multitude, unforgiving desert, and the people quarreled with Moses. Quarreled, the same word used at Rephidim, the same aggressiveness, the same ingratitude. Why have you brought the assembly of the Lord into this wilderness, that we should die here, both we and our cattle? And why have you made us come up out of Egypt to bring us to this evil place? It is no place for grain or figs or vines or pomegranates, and there is no water to drink. 40 years of daily manna, 40 years of clothes that didn't wear out and feet that didn't swell, 40 years of cloud by day and fire by night, 40 years of visible divine presence, and the same complaint as always, as if nothing had happened, as if the miracles counted for nothing. Moses and Aaron went to the entrance of the tent of meeting. They fell on their faces. The glory of the Lord appeared. God spoke. The instruction was specific. Numbers chapter 20, verses 7 and 8. Take the staff and assemble the congregation, you and Aaron your brother, and tell the rock before their eyes to yield its water. So you shall bring water out of the rock for them, and give drink to the congregation and their cattle. Tell the rock, don't strike, speak. The first time at Rephidim, 40 years earlier, God had commanded him to strike. This time the order was different. Just speak. The rock would obey the word. It didn't need violence. It didn't need force. It didn't need anything but a voice directed at stone. Moses took the staff from before the Lord, as he had commanded. He assembled the congregation before the rock, 2 million people in a semicircle, waiting for water, waiting for a miracle. And then, something happened. Something that would cost everything. Moses opened his mouth and said, "Hear now, you rebels, shall we bring water for you out of this rock?" Rebels. The word came out loaded with decades of accumulated frustration, from sleepless nights mediating absurd conflicts, from constant intercessions for people who kept sinning, from threats of stoning, from organized rebellions, from criticism from his own family, from a people who were never satisfied no matter how many miracles they saw, and after the word came the act. Moses raised his hand. He struck the rock with his staff. Once, the rock didn't respond. He struck again, twice in total. Water gushed out, abundant, sufficient for the whole congregation and all the animals. The people drank. Their thirst was quenched. The immediate crisis was resolved. But God was not pleased. The sentence came immediately. Numbers 20, verse 12. Because you did not believe in me, to uphold me as holy in the eyes of the people of Israel, therefore you shall not bring this assembly into the land that I have given them. You shall not bring them in, neither Moses nor Aaron. 2 words. Final sentence, irrevocable. 40 years of faithful service, thousands of crises managed, countless successful intercessions, all of that, and in the end, exclusion from the promise for one moment of disobedience. The question that echoes for more than 3,000 years is inevitable. Why was this so serious? The people had done incomparably worse things. They built a golden calf and worshipped it while Moses was on the mountain receiving the law directly from God. 3,000 died that day, but the nation continued marching. They complained about God repeatedly, questioning his goodness and power. They wanted to go back to Egypt, preferring known slavery to uncertain freedom. They rejected the promised land when the spies brought a negative report, weeping all night and planning to stone Joshua and Caleb. They rebelled against the established leadership. They committed fornication with Moabite women. They worshipped foreign idols. And Moses, who interceded for them on all those occasions, who stood in the gap repeatedly, who begged God to forgive when God wanted to destroy, that Moses lost the inheritance for striking a rock instead of speaking to it. It seems disproportionate. It seems unfair. It seems cruel. But there's a logic that the surface doesn't reveal. The first problem was direct disobedience to a specific command. God said, "Speak." Moses struck. It's not a matter of result because the water came out anyway. It's a matter of exact obedience. When God gives a specific instruction, the specific instruction must be followed. It doesn't matter if the alternative method also works. It doesn't matter if it seems to give the same result. Partial obedience is total disobedience. The second problem was appropriation of glory. Moses said, "Shall we bring water for you? We will bring." First person plural, as if the power belonged to him and Aaron. as if they had their own ability to extract water from stone by personal force. The phrase subtly, almost imperceptibly, put Moses and Aaron in the place that belonged exclusively to God. The third problem was a wrong representation of divine character. Moses was God's official spokesman before the people. What he did in God's name shaped the perception that Israel had of God. When Moses acted with visible anger, striking the rock with force, calling the people rebels with a tone of contempt, he conveyed an image of an irritated, impatient, frustrated, exhausted God. But God wasn't angry at that moment. He was ready to give water freely by a simple spoken command. The rock would obey a gentle word. It didn't need demonstrative violence. The fourth problem, perhaps the deepest, involves symbolism that would only make complete sense 1,500 years later. The rock, in several passages of Scripture, represents Christ. Paul wrote in 1 Corinthians chapter 10 that the spiritual rock that followed them was Christ. The first time at Rephidim, the rock needed to be struck so that water would come out. It was a type of the Messiah who would be struck once so that salvation would flow, but only once. Christ's sacrifice is not repeated. It doesn't need to be renewed. It doesn't require additional blows. Just speak, just ask, just believe. Grace flows. When Moses struck the rock a second time, he distorted the prophetic typology. He symbolically suggested that Christ would need to be struck repeatedly. He broke the foreshadowing that pointed to eternal reality. God operates with a principle that appears throughout the Bible. To whom much is given, much will be required. Moses had received more than any other human being of his time. He had talked with God face to face, without a veil, without an intermediary. He had seen the form of the Lord, though from behind, protected in the cleft of the rock. He had received direct revelation of God's words. He had performed signs and wonders that no other prophet would equal for centuries. With that extraordinary level of privilege came a corresponding level of responsibility. The same act that would go unnoticed in an ordinary Israelite became inadmissible in God's supreme representative. Not because God is arbitrary or unfair, because a leadership position carries different weight. Leaders' actions have amplified consequences. A common soldier who makes a tactical mistake can be warned and continue serving in the army. A general who makes the same mistake can lose a decisive battle and change the course of the war. Position amplifies consequences. Moses was not a common soldier. He was the supreme general under God, and generals are judged by standards that soldiers never face. This explains the severity of the sentence, but it doesn't diminish the pain of receiving it. Moses tried to reverse the decree. Deuteronomy chapter 3 records the detailed plea, verses 23 to 25. And I pleaded with the Lord at that time, saying, O Lord God, you have only begun to show your servant your greatness and your mighty hand. For what God is there in heaven or on earth, who can do such works and mighty acts as yours? Please let me go over and see the good land beyond the Jordan, that good hill country and Lebanon. Let me cross over. Let me see. Let me step foot there, even just once. It was the request of a 120-year-old man who had dedicated the last 40 years of his life to a single mission: bringing the people to the inheritance promised to the fathers. He just wanted to experience, even for one day, the fruit of 4 decades of hard work and tireless perseverance. God's response was definitive. Verse 26, but the Lord was angry with me because of you and would not listen to me. And the Lord said to me, enough from you. Do not speak to me of this matter again. Enough. Do not speak to me of this matter again. The door was closed permanently. No appeal, no recourse. God made one concession. Verse 27, Go up to the top of Pisgah, and lift up your eyes westward and northward and southward and eastward, and look at it with your eyes, for you shall not go over this Jordan. You will see, but you will not enter. Aaron died first, on Mount Hor, on the border of the land of Edom. Moses, Aaron, and Eleazar went up the mountain in the sight of the whole congregation. Moses stripped Aaron of the priestly garments and put them on Eleazar, his son. And Aaron died there on the top of the mountain. Moses and Eleazar came down, and when the congregation saw that Aaron had died, they mourned for him 30 days. Moses' final months were dedicated to preparing the people for what would come without him. The entire book of Deuteronomy is essentially his farewell sermon. 5 long discourses recapping the history from Egypt, reaffirming the law in detail, warning about future dangers, pronouncing blessings and curses, individually blessing each tribe. He knew he wouldn't cross the Jordan. He knew Joshua would assume leadership. He knew his part in history was reaching its final chapter. And yet, he didn't stop serving. He didn't become bitter. He didn't abandon the people who, in a sense, had caused his exclusion. In Deuteronomy chapter 31, Moses made the official leadership transition. He called Joshua before all Israel and said publicly, "Be strong and courageous, for you shall go with this people into the land that the Lord has sworn to their fathers to give them, and you shall put them in possession of it. It is the Lord who goes before you. He will be with you. He will not leave you or forsake you. Do not fear or be dismayed." Joshua would enter, Moses would not, but the blessing was pronounced without resentment. Chapter 32 contains the Song of Moses, prophetic poetry of 43 verses about God's faithfulness, Israel's unfaithfulness, the judgments that would come, and the final restoration. Its farewell literature. The verbal legacy of a man who knew his words would be his last lasting contribution. And then the day arrived. Deuteronomy chapter 32, verses 48 to 52. That very day the Lord spoke to Moses, "Go up this mountain of the Abarim, Mount Nebo, which is in the land of Moab opposite Jericho, and view the land of Canaan, which I am giving to the people of Israel for a possession. And die on the mountain which you go up, and be gathered to your people." Go up, view, die, 3 imperatives, direct, final, no room for negotiation. 3. Moses climbed Mount Nebo alone at 120 years of age. Deuteronomy chapter 34 makes a point of recording that Moses' eyes were not dim and his vigor had not abated. He wasn't climbing as a man broken by time. He was climbing with full physical strength, with complete mental clarity, fully aware of each step bringing him closer to the end. From the summit of Nebo, God showed him all the land, Gilead as far as Dan, in the far north, all Naphtali, the land of Ephraim and Manasseh, all the land of Judah as far as the Western Sea, the Mediterranean, the Negev, the desert region to the south, the plain of the valley of Jericho, the city of palm trees, as far as Zoar. Moses saw everything, a complete panorama of the promise fulfilled, the green valleys that the people would cultivate, the hills where they would build cities, the rivers that would irrigate crops, the mountains that would serve as natural fortresses. 430 years of waiting since Abraham received the original promise, were there materialized in real landscape, visible, tangible, concrete. So close you could almost touch it. But not for Moses. God said, "This is the land of which I swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. I will give it to your offspring. I have let you see it with your eyes, but you shall not go over there. You shall not go over." And there, on the summit of Mount Nebo, in the land of Moab, opposite Beth Peor, Moses, the servant of the Lord, died according to the word of the Lord. Some ancient translations and rabbinic commentaries interpret the expression "according to the word of the Lord" literally and poetically. They say Moses died by the kiss of God, Life departed not through prolonged illness, not through tragic accident, not through external violence. It departed because God called it back with tenderness. Verse 6 adds an extraordinary detail that echoes through the millennia. God buried him personally, and he buried him in the valley in the land of Moab opposite Beth Peor. But no one knows the place of his burial to this day. No one knows. The most famous man in Israel, the deliverer, the lawgiver, the supreme prophet who spoke with God face to face. He was buried in a place that remains unknown to this day. No tomb to visit, no monument to venerate, no pilgrimage site to turn into an idol. Perhaps God knew the human tendency to worship creatures instead of the Creator. Perhaps he wanted to prevent Israel from turning Moses' bones into a magical relic. Perhaps he wanted the legacy to remain in written words, not in carved stones. The people mourned for 30 days, a full month of national mourning, collective weeping for the loss of the one who had led them for 4 complete decades. And then life continued. Joshua took over. The Jordan was miraculously crossed, waters piling up while the people passed on dry ground. Jericho fell, with walls crumbling at the sound of trumpets. The conquest began, exactly as God had planned from the beginning, with or without Moses. Verse 10 of chapter 34 makes a statement that echoes through the centuries. And there has not arisen a prophet since in Israel like Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face. Face to face. No other prophet had that singular intimacy. No other talked with God without a veil, without an angelic intermediary, without protective distance. Moses was unique, irreplaceable, incomparable, and yet he stayed. Outside, the story could end here, with the tragedy of a man who gave everything for decades and lost the final reward for a moment of understandable human weakness. It would be a narrative about implacable justice, about irreversible consequences, about the brutal price that leadership exacts from those who exercise it. But there's a reading that few consider, a perspective that completely inverts the traditional interpretation. Moses was 120 years old. He had carried that people for 4 complete decades. He had seen bloody rebellions, devastating plagues, mass deaths, terrible judgments. He had mediated endless conflicts, endured constant ingratitude, faced threats to his own life. He was tired, exhausted. He had asked to die on at least one occasion documented in Scripture. The weight was too much for any human being to carry indefinitely, and the promised land would not be rest. It would be war. Consider what Joshua faced after Moses died. It wasn't a triumphal entry into a peaceful paradise. It was decades of bloody battles, city after city conquered by the sword. Ai after the initial failure and reorganization, Jericho with its miraculous walls. Hazor, the largest Canaanite city, burned to its foundations. 31 kings defeated in successive military campaigns. Blood, sweat, constant military strategy, losses of Israelite combatants, permanent tension of prolonged war. Joshua fought for years before he could distribute the land among the tribes. And even then, the conquest was not complete during his lifetime. Enemies remained, conflicts remained, unconquered cities remained that would haunt Israel for generations. If Moses had entered, he would have had to lead all that military campaign. At 120 years old, after 40 years of desert, after carrying a people who never stopped complaining, doubting, rebelling. Perhaps the sentence was a gift, disguised as punishment. God took Moses directly to eternal rest. No more battles to plan, no more blood to shed, no more weight to carry. The last image that Moses' eyes recorded was the promise fulfilled in panoramic splendor. Green valleys stretching to the horizon, rivers shining under the afternoon sun, the land flowing with milk and honey, finally visible after centuries of patriarchal waiting. And after that spectacular, incomparable view, the kiss of God, and silence and peace. Moses didn't have to see the apostasy that would come in the following generations. He didn't have to see the repetitive cycles of sin and judgment during the turbulent period of the judges. He didn't have to see the nation demanding a human king because they rejected God's direct reign. He didn't have to see the kingdom split into two hostile parts. He didn't have to see Solomon's temple burned by Babylonians. He didn't have to see the 70-year exile. Moses exited at the highest possible point, with the promise realized before his eyes, with the essential mission accomplished. He had brought the people from Egypt to the edge of the inheritance. His work was complete. 1,500 years after Moses died on Nebo, something extraordinary happened that recontextualizes the entire narrative. On a mountain in Galilee, probably Tabor, Jesus was transfigured before Peter, James, and John. His face shone like the sun. His clothes became white as light, a whiteness no launderer on earth could produce, and two men appeared in glory, talking with him, Moses and Elijah. Moses, the man who couldn't enter the promised land, appeared inside it, not as a belated military conqueror, not as a political leader claiming rights, as a guest of honor of God's own Son, as a participant in a unique revelational moment in the history of redemption. Luke chapter 9 records that they were speaking about the Exodus that Jesus was about to accomplish in Jerusalem. Exodus, the same Greek word, the same concept of liberation and departure. Moses had executed the first Exodus, bringing Israel out of Egyptian slavery. Jesus would execute the definitive Exodus, bringing all humanity out of slavery to sin and death. And Moses was there to witness and discuss it. The exclusion from Nebo was not permanent. The sentence had an expiration date that no one knew. At the right time, in the right way, through means that only God could provide, Moses set foot on the land that he couldn't enter as Israel's leader. He stepped in as a participant in the greater revelation, as a witness to the glory that made everything he had experienced seem like a preliminary shadow. Mount Nebo was the end of a chapter. It was not the end of the story, and perhaps that's exactly what makes Moses' narrative so devastatingly hopeful for anyone who has ever felt they failed irrecoverably. The man who erred at the crucial moment, the leader who lost the reward for an instant of humanly understandable anger, the faithful servant who saw the promise from afar without being able to touch it at that specific moment. That man was not discarded forever. That man was not forgotten in divine economy. That man appeared in indescribable glory, talking face to face with the incarnate Son of God, inside the land that the temporary human sentence said he would never enter. Sometimes, what seems like definitive punishment is just postponement to something better. Sometimes, what seems like incomprehensible cruelty is the strangest and deepest form of divine care. And sometimes, the end that our limited eyes see is absolutely not the end that God planned from eternity. Moses died with the best view any human being could have at that moment in history. He beheld the fulfillment of 430 years of patriarchal promise. And then he was taken to rest that no earthly war could ever interrupt. The view from Nebo was the last earthly image his eyes recorded. But it was not the last image Moses would see, because 1,500 years later, on a different mountain, surrounded by impossible light that outshone the sun itself, Moses saw something infinitely superior to any promised landscape. He saw the face of Christ in glory, and he discovered that the Bible's apparently cruelest punishment may never have been true punishment at all. Perhaps it was just the longest, most mysterious, most incomprehensible path to a glory immensely greater than any earthly promised land could ever offer.